So my home team has made it to the Baseball World Series. And even though I'm not much of a sports guy, I figured why not add to that team spirit? But first, I think we need more wood. I considered two approaches when I was thinking of making this cutting board. My initial thought was to use a CNC and essentially cut out the entire design, and then after just filling it in with resin. The downside is, since this design is going to have a lot of different colors, I would have to pour one color at a time, let that layer dry, and then move on to the next pattern and the next color in the design. And that would have made me spend way too much time on a cutting board than I would like to spend on it. So my approach for this project was to pick out species of wood that closely resembles the color that I'm looking for. In this case, I'm using hard maple, yellow heart, padauk, and bloodwood. And I like this approach because I get to use hardwoods that I don't really use often in projects. Simply because one, they're expensive, and two, they're expensive. Here I'm just cutting down these rough boards down to approximately the size that I'll need for the final cutting board. In this case, the final cutting board size would be 11 by 17, so I'm just cutting these down to roughly 20 inches. Once I had enough material cut out, I sent each of the boards through the planer and the jointer to flatten both sides and the edges. I don't have any video of that because I don't have my planer and joiner in the garage yet, but a good friend of mine did allow me to use his machines to flatten and joint all my boards. And once I had the boards flattened to the proper thickness, I went ahead and ripped them down to roughly 1.5 inch wide strips. I then resawed some of the pieces into about 1/8 of an inch thick. And if you haven't seen my unboxing of the bandsaw, check the card above. Now that the parts are milled up, I'm going to arrange them into a pattern that sort of looks nice, and then go ahead and glue them up. There's no method I can explain to tell you how I got to the final design other than I found some inspiration online and I kind of just follow that as my guide. These are the bar clamps that I picked up from Rockler. They're pretty much my go-to clamps when it comes to gluing cutting boards together. I like that they keep things nice and flat and they're not so heavy and unwieldy to kind of move around in the shop. For gluing the pieces together, I'm using Titebond 2. If you do have Titebond 3, it'll be a lot better, but I've been using Titebond 2 for many years now on cutting boards, and it works out just fine. You just want to make sure that there's enough squeeze out to ensure that the entire surface of the wood has enough glue on it. I didn't have my glue brush to distribute the glue evenly on the piece of wood, so I just went ahead and wiggled it back and forth to make sure that the surfaces were in contact and the glue was nicely distributed. When you're clamping the boards together, you want to do it gradually because some of the boards, like in this case, will rise up. So you want to go nice and slow and make sure you push down on the board so that everything will be nice and flat. And after that, you just want to take a paper towel and just wipe off all the excess glue. I then added 2 more clamps to make sure that the clamping pressure was evenly distributed through the entire length of the board. And from there, I just went ahead and let it dry overnight. The next day I went back to my buddy's shop to use his sweet 12-inch joiner to flatten out the board. Man, it's nice to have a 12-inch joiner. Then I ran it through the planer a few times to get it nice and flat. From there, I used the table saw to trim out the board to the final size, which is 11 by 17. And once I got everything squared off to the final size, I went over to my CNC machine and started the routing process. The first pattern that I will be routing out is a circular concave shape. My thought is that concave shape will give me this gradient effect in the colored background for the logo. My initial rough pass will be done by a 1/4 inch flat bottom end mill, and then I'll run the final pass with a 1/16 inch ballpoint end mill. Having this probing tool is really key in getting this design accurate. What the machine is doing is it's establishing the 0 point for the X, Y, and Z axis, which is important for this design since we're overlaying multiple colors and cut paths on top of each other. If I ever have to remove the bit for a new tooling path, I would just need to simply reprobe the Z axis since each bit will come in different lengths. My first pass here, I totally screwed up. I didn't set the parameters correctly on the computer, so it went a lot further down than I wanted it to. But luckily I stopped it in time and I went ahead and made the changes in the computer and everything worked out fine afterwards. I'm using the 1/4 inch end mill because it will remove most of the material and it will save us a lot of time. Then I can move over to the smaller 1/16 inch ballpoint end mill to further refine the shape of the concave circle. Once that's done, I can go ahead and pour the first layer of epoxy and then let it cure overnight. For the next tooling path, I'm using a 1/16 inch flat end mill. This will allow me to maintain tight radius in the corners as well as give me good definition to maintain the overall shape. Then I can go ahead and fill that in. And for the final tooling path, I'm using the same 1/16 inch ballpoint end mill that I used to refine the concave circle. Then I can fill that in with the final color. So I ran into a little bit of an issue here. I left this overnight to dry and harden up, but this area right here, it's a little squishy. I'm thinking that the mix didn't have enough hardener to properly cure the epoxy. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to scrape off this section right here and then pretty much refill that area with new epoxy. I tried to take out as much of the epoxy as I could, but boy, was it a total mess. Once that was done, I went ahead and made myself a small little batch of epoxy and poured it into the small gap that I cleared out. Much better. Now that I got that fixed, it's nice and solid. The board is already cured. Typically after this process, I would take it to the planer and flatten it out. Since I don't have my planer in the shop just yet, I'm going to use my belt sander to sand down the extra epoxy and get it flat and smooth. When you're sanding resin or epoxy, you want to make sure that you're wearing the appropriate respirator. You're pretty much sanding plastic, so you definitely don't want to breathe any of this in. The belt sander could be pretty aggressive, so I went back with my random orbital sander to finish sanding so that it will give me a nice smooth surface. For the finishing, I'm just using a basic salad bowl finish, and man, do these color pop. That's where I'll leave the video off for today. That's how I pretty much make all my cutting boards. They're pretty basic. There's nothing too difficult about it. So I do hope that you found some value in this video so that you can make a cutting board for yourself as well. If you did like this video, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and smash that thumbs up. I appreciate it. So until next time, this is Bao with Design Craft Workshop. See ya.